Good afternoon folks, welcome to Almeria. My name's Toad, you're watching Visordown, and this is the launch of the new 2023 Ducati Streetfighter V4 S. So this has been a launch I've been looking forward to for a little while. So I rode one of the previous generation bikes right at the end of the summer 2022 at the Silverstone Ducati track day and had an absolute ball on the GP circuit over at Silverstone. A very different proposition coming to Andalucia in Almeria for the track launch of the 2023 model. I've got to say, Andalucia wouldn't be my first choice track. It's quite tight, it's quite technical in sections. It does have some nice bits of flow to it, but then it seems to lose that flow and you come into a more technical bit. But Ducati said they wanted to bring us here for that reason. They wanted to bring us here because this circuit is a challenge. It's a challenge for the bike, a challenge for the riders, and a challenge for them to try and create a package that works in those conditions. So I'll just quickly go over the differences between the S model and the standard V4. So really it is down to the suspension. You've got the Smart EC 2.0 electronically semi-active suspension on the S version. You've got manually adjustable suspension on the V4. You also get a lightweight lithium battery on the V4 S, and the wheels are lightweight Marzocchini forged aluminium items on the S model as well. So all around you've got a bit more bling. Personally, the S is the one that you want to go for. If you're into performance riding, you do a bit of track riding, the suspension on this is the absolute best in the business. You cannot get any better than that. And for that reason and that reason alone, this is the bike that you want. So there's a price difference between the different colours of the Panigale in the range. I'm just checking my notes. So the red bike, which we haven't ridden today, but you might be looking at on your screen, is £22,895. And the Nero version, which is this very nice looking bike that you can see behind me, which we've been riding all day, is £23,195. So I'm going to go through, before I start talking about how the bike handled and what I thought to it and what I thought to the changes, I'm going to go through all of the changes now. There is quite a lot, so I've got my notes here just to make sure that I don't miss anything. So we've got one of the big changes for the Panigale was the torque mapping in the early gear, in the low gears in the gearbox. So it softened the torque curve a little bit, made the bike a little bit more manageable, and was really something that I noticed on the launch of the Panigale 2022 model at Jerez. This has got a similar thing. This used to have grouped torque mapping. This has now got individual bespoke maps for each of the first 4 gears, which just makes that delivery out of the corner much smoother and more manageable. You've also got revised rev limits. So up to 5th, you've got a 14,500 RPM rev limit. Once you get into 6th, it goes up to 15,000 RPM. You've got revised exhaust. So the outlet diameter of the exhaust is slightly bigger, and that means it's just a slightly freer flowing and easier breathing exhaust. You've got a revised cooling system, so the cooling fan is now retuned to switch on a little bit earlier to help manage the heat when it starts to build up in the engine. We've got 208 horsepower claimed from Ducati at 13,000 RPM. We've got 123 Newton meters of torque, and Ducati are claiming that 70% of that torque is available from like about 4,000 RPM. It's 1.7 kilos lighter thanks to the lithium battery, and you've got a new fuel tank, which is very similar to the one on the Panigale. So it's remodeled and resculpted around your legs to make it easier to hold on to, and it gives you an extra litre of fuel capacity as well, which is always handy. We've got a revised TFT graphics. I'm going to go through the TFT and the electronics in a bit more detail because there's some really cool features in there, but the TFT is slightly revised in the layout and the design of it, although it still outwardly looks the same when it's sat on the bike. We've got a new track Evo setting, which has got revised modes in there. You've also got a new wet mode as well, and you've also got the opportunity, if you want to take out all of the electronic assistance and even the electronic semi-active damping in the suspension, and ride it just in its natural, raw, brutal state if you so wish. And the engine brake control has been tweaked as per the Panigale. That's basically everything. So what have we done today? Well, we've been hammering around Andalucia, and as I said, it wouldn't be my first choice for a track launch on a bike. It's quite bumpy, it's quite narrow in places and very technical, but I really got to grips with it after the 3rd session. The first 3 sessions, I was kind of all at sea and didn't really know where I was going, but the final few sessions, I managed to sort of get down to a decent lap time, and off the TFT dash, which has got a GPS data logger built into it on these bikes, I think I got down to a 2:13 around Andalucia, which I'm pretty happy about because I'm not a racer, I'm not an avid track day rider. The only time I come on track is when I go on a bike launch. First and foremost, It's still quite brutal to ride. I was surprised about that because the Panigale, and I keep going back to the Panigale, but they're so similar in their design, and obviously this has got a lot of the Panigale in there. When we went on the 2022 launch of the Panigale, it was a revelation in how much easier it was to ride than the previous generation bike. It was so much more user-friendly, the front felt nicer, on the brakes you had such lovely, gorgeous feel. This is still a bit of an animal, I'm not going to lie. The changes have made it a better bike all around, so they tweaked the suspension a little bit as well, and the swing arm pivot is now slightly higher as per the 2022 Panigale, and all those things make it a bit more manageable, but it still shakes its head at you. It's still, if you get on the power a little bit early in a corner, it's still going to get a little bit upset and frisky and jump around, but it's just ultimately engaging to ride. You really have to be at your best on this thing if you want to get the best from it. I talked about the TFT earlier on, and one very cool feature that I've been sort of using to guide me around the circuit. You've got the rider assistance settings on the right hand side of the TFT when you go into race mode. So you've got your Ducati wheelie control, your traction control, you've got your slide control, you've got your engine, not your engine brake control, you've got your other electronic assistance on the right hand side. When those assistance systems are triggered and when they're intervening or they're limiting power or they're stopping the back from sliding, they'll flash on the right hand side of the TFT, so you know that the bike is sort of holding you back in that bit. And then as you're riding down the straight, you can kind of go into the setting on the right hand handlebar and just really quickly and easily just turn down the level of intervention so that it's not cutting in quite so much. It's a really handy feature if you are going to be riding a lot on track, so I did quite like that. Another slight change which was quite noticeable on this circuit today was the tweaked riding position. So the seat that you can see there looks pretty much identical to the 2022 Streetfighter, but it's slightly flatter, it's got a bit more padding in it. They've not really increased the seat height at all. They took it out from underneath the seat, added a bit more padding, so it's a bit more comfortable, but ultimately you feel a lot more secure on the bike. It's a lot more, you're not sliding around the seat on it. You used to sort of get on the brakes on the Streetfighter and you'd sort of like power on the brakes and you'd kind of like butt up against the tank as you sort of slid down to the front end of the bike, but you don't really get so much of that, which is really good. So I've got to talk about the engine because the V4 Panigale engine, Streetfighter engine, is an absolute brute of a beast. 208 horsepower in a naked bike feels like an absolute thrill, especially on a track like this. Obviously we've not ridden it on the road, and I still think a little bit that having a super naked bike with all that power and all those toys and all those gizmos, but having a bike that has got this capability, but you can't really extract any of that on the road. You have to come to a track to enjoy it and to get the most out of it. I do think it's a little bit of an oxymoron. That said, it's been an absolute pleasure riding it around this circuit in the last 3 sessions at least anyway, once I'd got to grips with where I was going and what I was doing. All of the changes, they're kind of harder to put your finger on than they were on the Panigale. The Panigale, it was obvious that the bike had been improved in so many different ways. It's a little bit more nuanced with the Streetfighter. Don't get me wrong, it's still there. They've still improved it. The electronics, the suspension changes, the swing arm pivot being a bit higher makes all the difference. But yeah, it's a little bit harder to put your finger on. I'm just going to talk as well about the riding modes, because the first sessions that we did on the bike, we went out in just a sport mode, which is effectively what you'd use if you're riding on the road. And the bike was very soft. It was squatting still, even with the swing arm pivot being slightly higher. It was squatting, it was moving under acceleration, and you were getting little slides and stuff like that. And it was quite brutal to ride actually. You had to really work at it, and I was blowing out of my arse by about lap 4 or 5, and then pretty much we only got 5 laps because they were only short 10-minute sessions. Came back into the pits, and for the next session I put it in race mode. So the intervention had been reduced, the suspension had been stiffened up, the bike was probably a little bit firmer at both ends, and the wheelie control was reduced and so on, and the ABS, the rear, was switched off. Went out again, and to my surprise, the bike actually felt more intuitive. It was much more direct, it was much more precise, it wasn't sliding so much, it wasn't pumping at the back so much. I was working harder in terms of the physical work that I was having to do to keep on top of the bike and to keep riding the bike, but it was actually a better place to be in race mode, and I thought it would have made it even harder to ride, both physically and in terms of, you know, the way that you were riding it and where you had to position the bike. But it actually wasn't the case. On the track, race mode is a much easier mode to ride in. It's much more direct, much more precise, and much more fun. Funnily enough, when I got back onto the bike for one of my later sessions, the guy riding it before me put it back into sport mode, and I went out without realising, and I thought there was something wrong with the tyres on the bike because the amount of slide that I was getting in the corners was just ridiculous. Came back in, realised it was in sport, stuck it back in race for the final session, and had an absolute ball. So there we have it, it's the 2023 Streetfighter V4 S. It's still probably the most brutal of all of the super naked bikes. It's still probably one of the most easily recognisable and striking looking. It really is a beautiful bit of kit. I've thoroughly enjoyed my day on it. We are going to be getting one in the UK to do a full UK road test once they arrive in the UK, so keep your eye out on that. And yeah, if you want to find out any more information about this bike, there is a full written editorial review on Visordown.com. And if you've liked this video, drop a comment, hit like and subscribe, and head over to Visordown.com for all the latest news, reviews and motorcycle features. Thank you very much, folks, and I will see you on the next one.